We've got sound. Okay, once again, welcome to the Martin Regional Library. And this is our Ask a Mexican among Okies here in Tulsa. So, damos una bienvenida bien fuerte para Gustavo Arellano. Mexican. Con tanto gusto que están con nosotros. We're so glad you're here with us tonight. ¿Vas a hablar, Gustavo?
Sí, thank you. Thank you all for having me. Gracias a todos por estar aquí esta tarde. Let's talk. Let's ask, actually, right?
Okay. Let's introduce our co-presenters that pitched in very valientemente, bravely. Linda Allegro is a professor of political science at TCC, Tulsa Community College. And a big supporter of and Francisco Treviño. Levanta la mano, Francisco. Al gran nivel, que is president of the Greater Tulsa Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So a big thank you to them. So, Linda, are you going to ask our first question?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. These are the questions that were emailed in this week. Here's the first question. How did you get started in the syndicated column business?
I get started in syndicated column business. Can you turn off the music? As much as I love the oldies in the background, I think some of you guys might want to pay more attention to Richie Valens than to me right now, which is totally understandable. Don't get me wrong, because frankly I would too. How did I start in the syndicated business? Well, first I think the first question is, what exactly is Ask a Mexican? Maybe for some of you in the audience. So really briefly, I write a column. Well, first of all, I'm not from Tulsa, obviously. I come from sunny California, Orange County, California. I'm the managing editor for a newspaper called the OC Weekly. It's a free newspaper just like Urban Tulsa Weekly. And I write a column there called Ask a Mexican, where people send me questions about Mexicans and I answer them. And it can be whatever questions they may be, racist, sexist, about history, about taxes, about midgets. Whatever the questions may be, I answer them. And the purpose of the column is not a joke column. I'm not trying to be a minor league Carlos Mencia or George Lopez. It's very specifically to debunk and deconstruct stereotypes that people have about Mexicans. It started in 2004 out in Orange County, and it's been syndicated here in urban Tulsa since 2006. It got syndicated. That's my question to this day. What happened? No, I know the specific answer. What happened was, I started the column in 2004. It was meant to be a satirical response to the many racists that we have in Orange County. Until Arizona came into play, especially Phoenix and Arpayaso, we were the Mexican-hating capital of the United States. But then Phoenix took our title, damn it. We'll get it back one day, mark my words. So we had to respond to racism. We had to respond to bigotry, and the best way to do it, we found, was through satire, which of course we'll talk about later, the methodology of the column. And that was in 2004. I never imagined the column would ever be syndicated anywhere else. I really thought that the only paper that had the guts, if you want to call it, but I think more sort of el sentimiento, the sentiment, or the ideas of the mission statement, I guess, to carry the column would be the OC Weekly. All of that changed, though, in 2006 when the LA Times did this big story about me, like 5,000 words about who I was, my family, and the like. After that, newspapers across the country started calling in. Urban Tulsa was actually one of the first newspapers in the United States to carry the column that was in Orange County. The very first one I'll always remember was the Albuquerque Alibi. Then after that, there was a second batch of papers that all started carrying at the same time. So Tulsa here was one of the first markets to do that. So, and that was 2006, and here I am continuing the column to this day. So that's how it started. That's a short answer, right?
And how many are they?
The column now comes out in 39 newspapers across the country with a weekly circulation of over 2 million. It comes out in places, a little bit about myself. I'm born and raised in Southern California. Parents de Jerez, Zacatecas. I know there's a lot of Zacatecanos here, which makes me really happy. A lot of Tamborazo here, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. We should have had a Tamborazo band here.
Sara, talk to Sara.
Sara, ¿dónde está el Tamborazo? La marcha de Zacatecas aquí, ¿no? A la salida. Sorry, we're sharing a Zacatecan moment for those of you who are not from Zacatecas. Anyways, so born and raised in Southern California, which of course, in Southern California, we think all Mexicans across the United States live in Southern California, and maybe some in Texas and Arizona as well. So the column comes out in places where I expected them to come out. Los Angeles, San Diego, Houston, Dallas, and then places where I kind of got surprised that there was interest in it, like say Seattle or New York or Las Vegas or Salt Lake City. And then I have to admit, places that when I got a call saying, I want to carry your column, I'm like, are there Mexicans there? Like Tulsa. Tulsa was one of the places. Chattanooga, Macon, Georgia. I just got a paper in Fayetteville, Arkansas. As a son of Southern California, it makes no sense for me that these markets want to carry the column. Of course, once I get out of my, how would you say, provincial mind, Mexicans are all over the United States. The largest movement of Latinos in the past decade has been to the Midwest and the South. It's the South actually more than any other region, but the Midwest as well. So now Mexicanos, we are all over the United States. So the paper or the column is now getting carried in markets where Mexicans are becoming a vital and important part of the population of this particular region or of a particular urban area.
Okay, the next question is, in your mind, what is it gonna take for a gabacho to accept a Mexican?
What is it going to take for a gabacho to understand the Mexican? Before I answer that question, of course, we have to define what a gabacho is. A gabacho is just another word for gringo, and I think all gringos in the United States know what a gringo is. In fact, more gringos call themselves gringos than Mexicans call gringos gringos. So what will it take for gabachos to understand Mexico or accept them? I don't know, because as I like to say in my column, I try to make this point again and again whenever I talk about it, Mexicans have been becoming Americans, have been assimilating or acculturating, whichever word you want to use, in the United States as long as there have been Mexicans in the United States. America, however, does not want to accept that fact. America does not want to allow those Mexicans to assimilate. So we have so many examples of Mexicans, of Mexican immigrants and children of Mexicans becoming fully cultured Americans, yet a lot of people still will have those stereotypes and misconceptions that people have about Mexicans. And in a way, I actually understand the prejudice and the bigotry that Americans have had for Mexicans for over 150 years. Because if you think about it, I have a loud voice anyway. If you think about it, Mexico is America's eternal rival. And I mean, we share a border. We've been in what? 2 official wars with Mexico and a hell of a lot of unofficial wars like Pershing, expedition and gosh, how many blockades of Veracruz have we gone through over the centuries? And then, of course, the whole issue of immigration, whether legal or illegal. And then I would even argue that there's just cultural differences that go back all the way to the time when the Spanish Armada was trying to invade England. You think about it. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous to go back centuries, but you think of the divide of Mexico, quote unquote, what a Mexican is versus what a quote unquote American is. An American traditionally is supposed to be white, is supposed to speak English, and is supposed to be, of a Protestant religion. A Mexican is supposed to be Hispanic, Mexican, non-white, speaks Spanish, and Catholic. And these are divides that go all the way back. And if you read the propaganda that the English were saying against the Spaniards, it's the same propaganda that people use against Mexicans nowadays. So in some ways, I think Mexicans are always going to remain a mystery to Americans or to the rest of the country. But again, us Mexicans, we are like, okay, fine, we just move on and we become Americans, whether Americans want to accept it or not. Okay, sure. It's true.
Here's the next question that might be a nice segue to what you just said. Do Mexicans know that Mexico is not the only Spanish-speaking country in the Western Hemisphere?
What other countries are there? I thought Mexico was the entirety of Latin America. No, well, one way that I get this question in a way, other Latinos, and there's so many Latinos in the United States are not Mexicans, they get upset. They say, why does everyone think I'm a Mexican? Well, I'm not Mexican, I'm Peruvian, I'm Boliviano, I'm Chileno, I'm Brasileiro, or all these things, yet I get mistaken for being a Mexican. And the answer to that is simple, and it depends on what part of the United States you're from. If I go to, if I go to Miami, people are probably going to mistake me for Cuban or South American. If I go to New York, I'll probably be mistaken for Puerto Rican or Dominican. But if you're in Southern California and you're Latino for the most part, you're going to be mistaken for being a Mexican, only just because that is a dominant culture at large, at a particular region of the United States. And of course among Mexicans, and of course we have many good Salvadoran and Guatemalteco friends, except Puerto Ricans. We don't like them because their boxers always beat ours. That's it. Tito Trinidad, I love him, and Filipinos too. Damn Pacquiao.
This question is pretty simple. It's from the audience, and it's simple for you. Tamales or hamburgers?
Tamales or hamburgers? How about a tamale hamburger?
There you go.
Yeah.
Salsa roja, verde.
Las dos. Salsa de chile de árbol. Muy zacatecano.
Pedro Infante or Frank Sinatra?
Oh my God. Los dos? Los dos. Pedro Infante, by the way, for those of you who don't know, he's a great Mexican ranchera singer. He'd be like, what would be his contemporary? Well, Frank Sinatra, I guess. But Pedro Infante was such a much better actor than Frank, and he wasn't also as much of a booze hound as Frank was either.
Español o inglés?
Las dos. Wait. Las two.
Okay, you mentioned that Orange County is pretty racist. You mentioned Arizona. Well, Oklahoma's gone through its share of anti-immigrant legislation with 1804. And the question is, do you have a message for Mexicans in Oklahoma, for Okies about Mexicans?
A message for Mexicans or a message for Okies?
Okay, I'll read it again. Do you have a message for Mexicans in Oklahoma and for Okies about Mexicans?
Okay. Actually, it's funny. I'm here in Tulsa because 2 days ago I was speaking about how the Grapes of Wrath, how you could run a parallel between the Grapes of Wrath, between the plights of Oklahomans of the 1930s and people from Arkansas and Texas, all those Dust Bowl refugees from the 1930s, to the plight of Mexicans today. I don't know how you folks here in Oklahoma feel about the Grapes of Wrath. Maybe you guys like it, maybe you guys hate it. When I read it in my senior year in high school, I loved it. I love Steinbeck just in general, the Red Pony and Of Mice and Men and Black Pearl. But I love the Grapes of Wrath because for me as a student, as a child of Mexican immigrants, it taught me a whole new chapter about American history that I never comprehended. Sure, we learned about the Dust Bowl in our American history classes. We learned that people didn't like, people from Oklahoma, derisively referred to as Okies. But to see the racism, the bigotry that these Okies were suffering by my people in California, not Mexicans. I'm talking about white American Californians in Mexico, in California against Okies. It was amazing. Then you actually read the historical record. You read how California, they set up a border patrol right there on Route 66 to make sure that these Okies were not coming into California. Even though they were American citizens, even though they were white people, even though they were their fellow Americans, we did not want you Okies to come in. We did not want you to invade our Golden State. And then when you guys came in, we called you all a bunch of criminals. You were stealing our jobs. You were stealing you're just plain and simple thieves. You lived 15 to a house. You spoke funny. Your English was really funny and weird. You had these weird religions and that's what people say about Mexicans nowadays. Except here's a big difference. All those Okies, they were legal American citizens. So the message I have for the folks here of Oklahoma about, is remember your history, remember American history, and it didn't matter. I know people sometimes like to say, well, I'm not against legal migration, I'm against illegal immigration, and then people start rattling off all these sins. Those are the same sins that us in California were accusing maybe some of your cousins or maybe some of your family members when you're coming over here. So a lot of this hype, I would argue, a lot of this hype about Mexicans coming into Oklahoma, for you folks in general, but in the United States in particular, this idea of reconquista, that somehow we're going to take over the United States and we're all going to be speaking Spanish within a generation, just destroy this country. It's a bunch of bull. It's an absolute bunch of bull. And then for the Mexicans, so that's my message to Oklahoma, to the sons and daughters of the land. And then for the Mexicans in the audience of Oklahoma, I would argue, just honestly, just continue to live your life because you folks are obviously going to be part of Oklahoman culture, whether other people want to or not. Definitely fight any legislation that is like English only, insanity, and any things like that. Fight that legislation, be prominent out there. But the best way to show the doubters is by living life, by getting your jobs, by, kids, of course, going through school, going through college, I don't know what's the rivalries here, folks, so I don't know if you guys like Oklahoma State more than University of Oklahoma, or even Tulsa, or Oral Roberts. I don't know. I come as an outsider. I just know your football teams. That's it. So that's I think the best way to do it, because of course Mexicans are going to become Americans. It just happens. It just absolutely happens. My parents, my mom came here as a legal immigrant in the 1960s because my grandmother, she was born in Arizona in 1915 because her parents fled the Mexican Revolution. My dad, the first time he came to this country was in the trunk of a Chevy in 1968. Another time he hopped the border fence. Another time he cut a hole through the border fence. Another time there wasn't no fence, so he just walked across the desert, because that's so easy to do in the middle of July down there. Another time he crawled through a sewer to get into this country, every which way but loose. They've been in this country for 40-some years. They can speak English to any of you, but 95% of their lives they speak in Spanish. But within one generation, and I'll even go this far. A lot of people, if they see my parents, my dad had a 4th grade education, my mom had a 9th grade education, they say, oh, those are failures, those are dumb Mexicans. Well, those dumb Mexicans, within one generation, created 3 kids who have master's degrees, another one that's on the way out, and kids who, I know how to speak Spanish, fully bilingual, poco pocho, but within the first language I spoke was Spanish, and I prefer English, and we're not the exception. We are the rule. We are the rule. So that would be my message. That would be the lesson for people who think in Oklahoma, who people think Mexicans don't assimilate, and that would be my advice to Mexicans here. Just keep on keeping on, como se dice.
All right. And then to finish it off, I would ask somebody to ask the Native American how they felt about the Oklahoma land run.
Oh yeah. I thank you for reminding me. Soonerlize the illegal immigrants. Isn't the Sooner myth that the people who first came in were the ones who snuck across the border? Or maybe I'm just a dumb Californian. Who knows?
And they were running from something.
Exactly.
So anyway, thank you. You touched a little bit on your education background in the beginning, but I want to ask you. Did you ever feel discriminated against as you were growing up? Fast.
Yes, I was mostly discriminated against, though, by my fellow Mexicans. Well, I got discriminated twofold. I got discriminated by everyone for being a nerd, because I know being a nerd now is cool, but when I was growing up, it wasn't cool to be a nerd, or a bookworm or whatever. But then by my nerds of the world unite, right? Que viva los nerds! But as a Mexican, I mostly got discriminated against. But me growing up, it's obviously different, I would think, than growing up here in Tulsa, in that my part of it, grew up in Anaheim, 5 minutes away from Disneyland, but the neighborhood that I was almost all immigrant, and everybody was an immigrant. The quote-unquote white people were refugees from Romania, Poland, the former Soviet bloc countries. The quote-unquote black kids were kids from Somalia.